From my home to yours, all the very, very best to you. Today's message is a part of a brand new book. I'm reaching for it right here. It's called They Walked with God. Isn't that a beautiful book? And what a beautiful thought. What can we learn from the Bible characters who walked alongside God? Well, that's the purpose of the book, and that's the purpose of today's conversation. I hope you can stick around because we're going to discuss the powerful story of Jairus. Let us know how to pray for you. Post your prayer needs, and we'll be happy to do so. Many years ago, I asked my daughters to participate in an experiment. Jenna was 8 at the time. I took her into the den. Andrea was 6. I had her stand on the other side of the den. Sarah and I, 3-year-old Sarah and I, sat on the couch and we watched. Jenna's job was to close her eyes and walk. Andrea's job was to be Jenna's eyes and talk her 8-year-old sister safely across the room using phrases like to take 2 steps to the right, take 4 giant steps to the left. Andrea successfully navigated her sister through a treacherous maze of chairs, a vacuum cleaner, a laundry basket. Yes, I had put them all out. And Jenna took her turn, and she guided Andrea past her mom's favorite lamp, and she shouted just in time to keep her from colliding into the wall when she thought her right foot was her left foot. After several treks through the maze that I had created, they stopped and we processed it. Jenna said, I didn't like that. It's a scary thing going where you can't see. Andrea agreed. I remember she said, I was afraid I was going to fall. I kept taking little steps just to be safe. I can relate, can't you? We grown-ups, we don't like the dark either, but we walk in it. And we, like Jenna, often complain about how scary it is to walk where we cannot see. And we, like Andrea, often take timid steps so we will not fall. Now, we've reason to be cautious. We're blind. We're blind to the future. It's one thing, to try to get across a room, but to try to get through the world. We're all sightless. We're all equally sightless. I mean, the famous know as little about the future as the unknown. No one knows how our children will turn out. None of us knows the day we will die. No one knows whom he or she will marry, or if a miscarriage lies before him or her. We're unalterably blind. We are all Jenna with her eyes shut, groping through a dark room, listening for a familiar voice. But with one difference. Her surroundings were familiar and friendly. Ours can be hostile and fatal. Her worst fear was a stubbed toe. Our worst fear is more threatening: cancer, divorce, loneliness, and death. And try as we might to walk as straight as we can, chances are a toe is going to get stubbed. And we're going to get hurt. Just ask Jairus, a man who has tried to walk as straight as he can. My Bible's open to the Gospel of Mark. And we learn in this story about Jairus and his turn into a cave, a dark cave, and he doesn't want to enter it alone. Jairus is the teacher in the synagogue. Now that may not mean much to you and me, but in the days of Christ, the leader of the synagogue he's the most important man in the community. The synagogue was the center of religion, education, leadership, and social activity. So the leader of the synagogue was the senior religious leader, the highest ranking professor, the mayor, and the best known citizen, all in one. Jairus has it all: job security, guaranteed income, guaranteed welcome at the coffee shop, a pension plan, golf every Thursday, an annual all expenses paid trip to the national convention. Who could ask for more? Jairus does. In fact, he'd trade the whole package of perks and privileges for just one assurance, and that is that his daughter will live. The Jairus we see in this story is not the clear-sighted black-frocked, nicely groomed civic leader. He is instead a blind man begging for a gift. He fell at the feet of Jesus, saying again and again, "My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and lived." Chapter 5, verse 23. He doesn't barter with Jesus. He just pleads. You know, there are those times in life when everything you have to offer is nothing compared to what you're asking to receive. And Jairus is at such a point. What could a man offer in exchange for the life of his child? So there are no games, no haggling, no masquerades. The situation is starkly simple. Jairus is blind to the future, and Jesus knows the future. So Jairus asks Jesus for help. And Jesus, who loves the honest heart, goes to give it. And God, who knows what it is like to lose a child, empowers his son. But before Jesus and Jairus get very far, they are interrupted by emissaries from the house of Jairus. "Your daughter is dead. There's no need to bother the teacher anymore." That's in verse 35. Now get ready. Hang on to your hat. Here's where the story really gets moving. Jesus goes from being led to leading, from being convinced by Jairus to convincing Jairus, from being admired to being laughed at, from helping out the people to casting out the people. Here is where Jesus takes control. But Jesus paid no attention to what they said. That's in verse 36. I love that line, don't you? It describes the critical principle for seeing the unseen, and that is you got to ignore what people say. There are times you got to just block them out. You got to turn them off. You got to close your ears, and you must walk away. You got to ignore the ones who say it's too late to start over. Disregard those who say you'll never amount to anything. You got to turn a deaf ear toward those who say that you aren't smart enough, fast enough, good looking enough, tall enough, big enough, rich enough. Just ignore them. Faith sometimes begins by stuffing your ears with cotton. Jesus turns immediately to Jairus and he pleads, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Jesus compels Jairus to see the unseen. And when Jesus says, "just believe," he is imploring. Don't limit your possibilities to what you can see. Don't listen only for the audible. Don't be controlled by the logical. Believe there is more to life than meets the eye. Trust me. Trust me, Jesus is pleading. Don't be afraid, just believe. As Paul wrote, remember, we set our eyes not on what we see, but what we cannot see. What we will see will last only a short time, but what we cannot see will last forever. 2 Corinthians 4:18. Jesus is asking Jairus to see the unseen and to make a choice, to either live by the facts or to see by faith. When tragedy strikes, we too are left to choose. Choose what we see. We can either see the hurt or the healer. The choice is ours. Jairus made his choice. He opted for faith. He chose Jesus. And faith in Jesus led him to his daughter. At the house, Jesus and Jairus encounter a group of mourners, and Jesus is troubled by their wailing. It bothers him that they express such anxiety over death. "Why are you crying and making so much noise? The child is not dead, only asleep." Verse 39. That's not a rhetorical question. It's an honest one. From his perspective, the girl's not dead. She's only asleep. From God's viewpoint, death is not permanent. It is a necessary step for passing from this world to the next. It's not an end, it's a beginning. And when we see death, we often see disaster. But when Jesus sees death, he sees deliverance. Now that's too much for the people to take. They laughed at him. Verse 40. You're not going to believe what Jesus does in response to their mockery. He throws them out. The scripture says he threw them out after throwing them out of the house. Verse 40. He doesn't just ask them politely to leave. He throws them out. He picks them up by the collar and the belt, and he sets them a-sailing. Jesus' response is decisive and strong. In the original text, the word here is the same word used to describe what Jesus did to the money changers in the temple. It's the same verb used 38 times to describe what Jesus did to the demons. Why? Why such force? Why such intolerance? Perhaps the answer is found by going back to my family's living room. That experience I told you about, the experiment, after Jenna and Andrea had taken turns guiding each other through the den, I decided to add a diabolical twist. On the last trip, I snuck up behind Jenna, who was walking with her eyes shut. And I began whispering, "Don't listen to her. Listen to me. I'll take care of you." Jenna stopped, and she analyzed the situation, and she made her choice between the two voices. "Be quiet, Daddy," she giggled, and then she continued in Andrea's direction. Undeterred, I grabbed the lid of a pan. I held it next to her ear, and I banged it a time or two with a spoon. Now she jumped, and she stopped. She was startled by the noise, but Andrea, seeing that her pilgrim was frightened, did a great thing. She ran across the room, and she threw her arms around her sister. She said, "Don't worry, I'm right here." And she wasn't about to let the noise distract Jenna from the journey. And God isn't going to let the noise distract you from yours. He's still busy casting out the critics and silencing the voices that could deter you. And some of his work you've seen, most of it you haven't. Only when you and I get home will we know how many times he has protected us from luring voices, don't you think? Only eternity will reveal the time he interfered with the transfer, protecting you from involvement in an unethical business, or fogged in the airport, distancing you from a shady opportunity, or flattened your tire, preventing you from checking into the hotel and meeting a seductive man. Only heaven will show the times he has protected us by giving us a mate who loves God more than we do, opening the door for a new business so we could attend the same church, having the right voice with the right message on the right radio station the day we needed his encouragement. Mark it down. God knows you and I are blind. He knows we're living by faith and not by sight, and he knows it doesn't come naturally. And I think that's one reason he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, not for her sake. I mean, she was better off in heaven, but for our sake, and to teach us that heaven sees when we trust. One final thought from the scene with your eyes closed experiment. I asked Jenna how she could hear Andrea's voice guiding her across the room when I was, trying to distract her by whispering in her ear. Her answer? "Oh, Dad, I just concentrated and I listened as hard as I could." Good advice for you and me.